Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here with you. So many old friends and colleagues and making new friends. It's a great experience for me. Yesterday, many of us listened to Professor Andrew Goldsmith's presentation on Colombia and the cartels there, and an update on what's happening with cocaine production and trafficking from that part of the world. And what I'll be giving you a brief overview on is a subset of that, the West African experience. When people think about, when you put the term West Africa and organised crime together, I'd venture to suggest that most of us would think 419 frauds, okay, that's what he's on about. No, this is actually West Africa being targeted by organised crime. So it's a different sort of perspective on it altogether. 10 years ago, in a small Pacific island nation, palm trees lining the beach, aqua blue water, fringing coral reef, idyllic sort of setting, some packages washed up on the beach. And the locals gathered these packages and were curious of the contents, as you would expect. They opened it up and it was full of white powder. They had no idea what it was. So they had a little discussion, and the elders decided that, well, they worked out what it was, they thought. And so the ladies took this white powder to the river and washed the village clothes with it. As it happened, it was cocaine. Rather expensive way, but an effective one apparently, reportedly, to wash one's clothes. Now, we don't know, as far as I'm aware, to this day, how that stuff washed up on that beach. But I think it would be reasonable to assume that it was a transshipment that went wrong, perhaps another example of Simon Overland's disorganised crime, where the vessel broke down or sank or something. So it washed up on this beach. Now, that was a passive transit of cocaine, and of course, when the relevant authorities were notified, all was made well and the community were unharmed by it. But what I'm going to describe to you now is a sobering look at what can happen when organised crime actually actively targets vulnerable states to move cocaine. And when one considers, in the ACC report, if I'm not mistaken, that in Australia our consumption of cocaine has doubled in the last 10 years, and it was in fact 10 years ago, or 2001, 9 years ago, that we had Australia's largest cocaine seizure, which I had a part to play in terms of the response as AC of National Operations at the time in the AFP. There was a tonne 10 years ago. Now, if we've doubled, what was that? What was our consumption rate then to have a tonne turn up in Western Australia by ship? What is it now? Who really knows? We don't know. But we know it is spreading. We know it is now not just Sydney and Melbourne, but Brisbane, of course, there was half a tonne last week. So I think we've got a massive problem. And as that problem increases, it's time, I think, if we're going to stay one step ahead of the game, rather than being reactive all the time, that we need to look at what's happening overseas. And so that's why I hope that what I'm about to explain to you with the West African experience may sound some alarm bells. Try this. Okay, just a bit of background. As you heard, I was a police advisor to the UN, but also head of police peacekeeping, 12,500 police from 100 contributing countries in 18 missions around the world. Some of these were in West Africa. We had 2 peacekeeping missions in Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire, and 2 peace-building missions in Sierra Leone and Guinea-Bissau. Now, a peace-building mission is really an evolution from a peacekeeping mission. Once the peace is restored, the troops leave, and then the responsibility passes from the Department of Peacekeeping Operations in New York to the Department of Political Affairs in New York, and it's peace building, so it's sort of like nation building. And 2 of those now, Sierra Leone and Guinea-Bissau, are where the UN is active. So this is West Africa, for those who are unfamiliar with the part of the world. Sierra Leone, Liberia. Liberia is about half the size of Victoria, so it's a big part of the world. Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast as it's sometimes known, and a little Guinea-Bissau there. It's not all the West African states. We also have, there's a mission the UN has in Western Sahara, but it's a more traditional mission of keeping sort of warring armies out. But these other missions, we have the two peacekeeping missions, Côte d'Ivoire, Liberia, and the peace-building missions in Sierra Leone and Guinea-Bissau. The strengths there in Liberia, UNMIL, is 1,200 plus police and 8,000 plus troops, and Côte d'Ivoire, 1,100. You see the figures there. The peace building missions, the numbers are significantly less, but very important work that they're doing. I just raised that to show that there is a big footprint of the UN, peacekeeping, police and troops in that part of the world, which presents us an opportunity to do something about what I'm going to explain in a minute. So what is the problem? There's no war occurring there now. Peace has been restored. But is the place safe and secure? Answer, no. Non-traditional threats, as they're known in the UN parlance, including transnational organised crime, are now targeting the area. Now, here's some UNODC data. The first one there, 1998, trafficking of cocaine to Europe was direct. But in 2008, you'll see there is another route now through West Africa. But interestingly, look at the consumption figures in the US, they've dropped. Look at the consumption figures in Europe. So my first comparison with Australia, it's doubled in Europe. We've seen a doubling effectively here in Australia. In that process, because law enforcement in the European Union has become more alert to this new threat, then obviously they've increased their interdiction, and anything coming out of Venezuela or that part of South America is suspect. Coming out of West Africa now, of course, it is suspect, but it can go through a number of other transit countries on the way. So, in our own region, maybe as we're seeing our cocaine consumption rates go up, we're going to see a similar problem. Now, this is a busy graph, and we don't have to analyse it in great detail, but what it shows effectively that since 2005, these different coloured circles represent the amount of cocaine trafficked up to Europe. It's a busy chart, and that's the message. It's a busy enterprise, a lot going on in that part of the world, trafficking through to Europe. Some examples, as over 2.5 tonnes were found by the French Navy, interdicted a ship off the Liberian coast, registered in Monrovia, the ship. Whether it was actually a Monrovian vessel or a flag inconvenience, I'm not sure, but it was still off the Liberian coast, and a Monrovian, which is the capital of Liberia, registered ship. It's a significant seizure. In Sierra Leone, there was an aircraft badged up as a Red Cross aircraft that landed, International Committee of the Red Cross, landed in Freetown, the capital, and the authorities located over 700 kilos of cocaine. In Gambia, although not one of the peacekeeping missions that I described, a couple of tonnes were interdicted and seized this year, in the middle of this year, and 15 people, including South Americans, not surprisingly, and Europeans and Africans were arrested. Similarly, in June again, in Liberia, a massive seizure, 4 tonnes by any measure, a huge seizure, was seized in the capital, Monrovia. Some arrests there. A lot of the work on that job was done with the assistance of the US DEA. And it became a diplomatic incident. The pilot was Russian and was arrested, and these people were taken back to the States, some sort of an extradition process, I think, and there was a diplomatic incident over the pilot with Russia. Now, I've got a short video. This, as you'll see, is AFP, but it's a different AFP to the videos we saw last night. And for those of you who are fans of Clint Eastwood and Will Smith and Kevin Zaccato, will be disappointed that none of these screen characters appear.
Another seizure of drugs in Guinea-Bissau. This time, some marijuana and a little cocaine. Not much, but this small West African country is fast becoming notorious for drug trafficking. Part of the problem is in the fragile political landscape. In early March, the president was assassinated, and cartels have been quick to take advantage of the instability.
Tous les pays de notre sous-région sont les cibles des narcotrafiquants. This whole part of the subcontinent is a target for drug traffickers. Why Guinea-Bissau in particular? It's the most fragile state in the region. There's no mystery about it. The money has to get here somehow. If it doesn't come from public funding or business, it'll come by other channels. And unfortunately, that means drugs.
The drugs from South America come into the country through the Bijagos archipelago, a string of more than 80 islands, which is impossible to monitor. They're shipped out again for Europe via Senegal or North Africa.
Drug traffickers have a perfect understanding of the weaknesses of this country when it comes to controlling borders or coastal areas, where people are basically not monitored. We just don't have the means to arrest the traffickers or to keep them in prison.
You can see why. The prison was destroyed during the Civil War 10 years ago and still hasn't been rebuilt. There isn't a huge supply of prisoners though. When this smuggling plane was captured last summer, one of the pilots was found to be under an international arrest warrant. The judge decided to let him off.
It's clear that organised crime still has more resources than the state. The criminals are always one step ahead of the police. But what helps is knowing that we're not alone in the struggle. Help from other countries, other police forces and international organisations is indispensable.
Police investigators have just received several million euros from the European Union to help modernise. But with corrupt judges, outdated or complicit politicians and an obliging military, Guinea-Bissau's war on drugs is facing an uphill struggle.
A couple of things from that. You'll notice that no prison in Guinea-Bissau, so where are we going to put these people when they're arrested? The involvement of the military in this illicit activity is well documented. They will come in, if there is a seizure, the military have come in and taken it from law enforcement and never to be seen again. We can imagine, what's happened to this stuff. It's obviously been moved on. So enormous problems there with corruption, and it doesn't just stop with the military. It's also within law enforcement. It's also within the political echelons of these countries, right up to very, very senior levels. Massive problem of corruption, and so you see how, even though the international community's efforts over many years in restoring peace and stability to these countries has been undermined significantly by international organised crime. And it is that corrupting influence which is frustrating ongoing efforts to build sustainable peace and security in these countries.